Welcome back to Quantum Thrive. Today we're exploring one of the most important domains of well-being, and honestly one of the most overlooked, relationships. So not just romantic relationships, but the relational environment we live inside every day, and how those environments shape our nervous system, our health and sense of self, and overall quality of life. We're continuing our Spring Thrive cycle, where we've been exploring the science and art of well-being through different domains of human functioning, and then applying the quantum lens in order to shift our behavior and our lifestyle so that we can manifest the life that we're wanting. Today's focus is the relational foundations of well-being. This week is all about relationships, so we're exploring boundaries, communication, and the relational patterns that influence well-being. And what we're really looking at underneath all of this is how do our relationships shape the way our nervous systems experience life and therefore how we experience life. So relationships are not just emotional experiences, they're biological experience. The people around us influence our stress hormones, inflammation, emotional regulation, identity formation, especially in early life, safety perception, recovery, and even longevity. So today we're going to look at the research around relationships and then explore how relational well-being actually shows up in everyday life. So before we move forward, I want to briefly revisit the integrated self model that we covered in the winter cycle of quantum, because relationships don't just impact one area of life, they affect mind, body, and spirit simultaneously. So if you look at the work of Federico Fagin, the integrated self can be understood as an interconnected system. The mind is cognitive and interpretive. Your body is biological and sensory. Your spirit is meaning making and values based. And well being comes from coherence between these systems. I've heard him describe your experience, our experience, as a color wheel, and I really appreciate that because there's no linear separation between any aspects of who we are as humans. Mind, body, and spirit all are interconnected, and so if he says to visualize a color wheel and imagine each of these aspects of self overlapping and giving us, when we work within each of those areas, we end up with an integrated sense of self. So when these systems interact, they create behavior, meaning, and authenticity. And of course, relationships influence all three of those areas. Relationships affect how we behave, how we interpret ourselves and others, and whether we feel safe enough to live authentically. Like our previous sessions, we're going to move through content first and self-assessment and then into reflection. So let's start with what the research actually says. Clementine chiming in there for a moment. Hey, babes. So the research is extremely clear. Relationships are not a nice bonus to well-being. They are one of the... Okay, sorry about that. Clementine's being a little on the sassy side this morning. Shh. So relationships are not a bonus to well-being. Here's the summary there. They are one of the core biological conditions that support health, longevity, emotional regulation, and life satisfaction. And this is played out over and over again. They have done research and show that if a human is put in social isolation, you start to lose your grip on reality very, very quickly. That's how deeply wired we are for connection. So one of the longest running longitudinal studies ever conducted is the Harvard study of adult development. It has followed participants since 1938, so mucho long time. And its clearest finding is simple. Good relationships keep us happier and healthier, even more than wealth, fame, and more than achievement. People who are socially connected tend to live longer, recover better, and experience better physical and emotional health overall. Strong social relationships were associated with a 50% increased likelihood of survival. So social connection protects our health. Connection is not just emotional comfort, it's actually health infrastructure. Loneliness and isolation strain our systems, nervous system specifically, and importantly, the research distinguishes between being alone and feeling alone. So you can have people around you constantly and still feel profoundly disconnected. You can be surrounded by people and still feel relationally undernourished. Number 3, relationship quality matters as much as relationship quantity. So not every relationship regulates your nervous system. Some relationships support regulation, others become chronic stress exposure. Not every relationship is medicine. Some are maintenance and some are inflammation. Number 4, secure relational bonds support emotional regulation. Secure relationships help us regulate stress. Again, I'm going to say secure relationships help us regulate stress. They act like external nervous system scaffolding. They help us recover after hard moments instead of remaining chronically activated. I will take this moment to point out that you can shift an insecure attachment style, avoidant or anxious, to a secure attachment experience. It generally requires a corrective emotional experience, excuse me, but it can be done consistently over time. So a healthy relationship does not remove stress. It helps your body come back down after stress. So as we all know, relationships are not free of stress. They often create quite a bit of stress. But when you are in relationship with the right person, it can help you re-regulate after an upsetting experience. And finally, belonging gives life structure and meaning. So across the Blue Zone's research, strong relationships, family connection, and shared rituals, community belonging consistently show up as major protective factors. Belonging tells the body, I'm not carrying life alone. So what Blue Zone research suggests about relationships? Dan Buettner studied communities around the world with unusually high concentrations of people living past 100 with low rates of chronic disease. If you have not watched any of the documentaries made about him, and the research clearly, highly recommend watching it. Very eye-opening. He's had a very interesting life and worth checking out. And so one of the biggest patterns that was recognized was relational structure. These were the original Blue Zones identified, and he added in Singapore as a modern example of a Blue Zone. Key insights. One of the most important insights from the Blue Zones research is this. People in these regions are not obsessively pursuing health. So they're not spending a massive amount of time watching Instagram reels and cultivating and curating the life. Their environments naturally reinforce it. And the same is true relationally. In Okinawa, Japan, lifelong social circles called moai, and I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly, provide consistent emotional and practical support across the lifespan. The lesson here is consistent support beats occasional rescue. Number two, Sardinia. Relationships are woven into daily life through family proximity, intergenerational connection, and communal rhythm. People age better when they remain needed, included, and known. Number three, and Loma Linda. Shared values and community norms support healthy behavior. Shared values make healthy choices easier to sustain. Number four, Ikaria, Greece. Relational life is slow and communal. People gather, linger, eat together, and remain socially connected throughout life. Low pressure togetherness is deeply regulating. Number five, Nicoya Peninsula. Strong family ties and purpose remain central throughout aging. Being useful and loved protects your vitality. And in Singapore, the environment itself supports connection and care through infrastructure and social systems. Well-being improves when connection becomes easier to access. So for today, we're going to simplify relational well-being into three main pathways: regulation, belonging, and agency. So regulation, do my relationships help my body settle, or do they keep me braced? Belonging, do I feel known, valued, and included, or do I feel invisible and alone? And agency, can I speak, choose, repair, and set limits, or do I disappear to preserve connection? And what you'll notice with all three of these things is that they're a two-sided equation because they are relational. So they're aspects of ourselves that we need to take responsibility for within relationship to ensure that we're showing up the best way possible. And we also have the other side of the equation, which is how people are showing up for us. So it's important to recognize both sides of that. So, number one, relationships equal regulation. Relationships shape our nervous system. Do my relationships help my body settle, or do they keep me braced? How this shows up in real life. So you feel calmer, clearer, and more grounded around safe people. Conflict can happen without constant fear of abandonment. That's one of the biggest things in our society is that we're not taught repair. So all relationships are harmony, disharmony, repair. So you're not going to avoid it. You're always going to experience disharmony in relationships. What sets healthy relationships apart from unhealthy dynamics is that in healthy relationships, people reach out and make repair successfully and repair the breach. Whereas in unhealthy relationships, you seem to have a constant cycle of harmony, disharmony. Avoid the situation, finally make your way back to harmony, and then you're back in disharmony again. So you can recover after stress instead of staying activated for days. Your body softens instead of preparing for attack, rejection, or withdrawal. And communication feels imperfect, but emotionally survivable. If this aspect is missing, you become hypervigilant, overfunctioning, avoidant, reactive, emotionally flooded, or chronically exhausted from managing relational stress. So take a moment here and make a note of your current regulation baseline. So, if you're functioning optimally, your relationships generally help you feel calm, safe, supported, and emotionally regulated, even during conflict or stress. Mid range, some relationships feel supportive, while others leave me emotionally activated, anxious, or drained. And strained, my relationships regularly leave me braced, emotionally overwhelmed, dysregulated, hypervigilant, or exhausted. That would be 1 through 3. And what you could actually do as well with this is you could create categories. So if you want to look at kind of like your family of origin, your best friend, and your intimate partner, if you have one, and see if those numbers differ so that you can kind of identify which relationships are functioning optimally. Maybe some need some help, some are really strained, or maybe you're just really strained across the board there. So it can help with discerning where you can put your attention. So number 2 is relationships equal belonging. Humans need to feel seen. Uh, do I feel known, valued, and included, or do I feel invisible and alone? So, how this shows up in your life: you feel emotionally safe enough to be yourself. You experience mutual care, not just usefulness, especially my overachieving ladies out there. You feel included without needing to constantly perform. Your relationships allow for authenticity, not masking. You feel emotionally held during difficult seasons. So the feeling included without needing to constantly perform. When we play reality TV bingo, this is one of the first things that you see popping up. There's a disconnect between somebody genuinely being themselves and somebody who's putting on a show for you. And that's one of the first things to start looking for when you begin dating someone. If this is missing from your life, you may surround yourself with people, yet still feel profoundly alone, unseen, emotionally disconnected, or fundamentally unimportant. So take a moment here to assess your belonging baseline. So optimally, I can make sense of challenges in a steady, grounded way, and I trust my perspective. Mid, sometimes I feel grounded, but stress can throw me into doubt or overthinking. Strained, life feels confusing or unfair. I get stuck in rumination and I can't find solid ground. And our third variable this week is agency. Healthy relationships leave room for selfhood. So, can I speak, choose, repair, and set limits, or do I disappear to preserve my connection? So, am I choosing attachment over authenticity? How this shows up in your real life: you can say no without overwhelming guilt. You can express needs, preferences, and emotions directly. Conflict allows for repair instead of punishment or shutdown. You remain connected to yourself while staying connected to others. Boundaries feel clarifying, not catastrophic, when someone else sets them and when we set them. So if this variable is missing, you may people please, over accommodate, avoid honesty, suppress needs, lose yourself in relationship, or feel trapped between authenticity and attachment. Your current agency baseline, take a minute to assess that. You can pause and proceed if you need to. So you're functioning at an optimal level here. You can communicate honestly, you can set boundaries, you can make choices and stay connected to yourself within relationship. Mid, I can advocate for myself in some situations, but I struggle with guilt, avoidance, or losing myself at times. Sometimes you see this popping up where in your intimate relationship you have a difficult time advocating for yourself, or in your family of origin. But like if you're at work or if you're out in the world, you have no problem standing up for yourself. So the closer the relationship, the more difficult time you have differentiating and experiencing agency. or strained. I regularly suppress my needs, avoid conflict, over accommodate others, and feel unable to express myself in relationships. And generally, we have a huge amount of resentment if we're living in that zone. If someone is struggling in the relationship domain, what you'll often see is chronic people pleasing, hyper independence and emotional withdrawal, difficulty trusting, relaxing, or fully receiving support, over functioning in relationships while feeling unseen or resentful, like deep brewing anger in this one sometimes, staying in relationships that feel emotionally unsafe, one-sided, or draining. They've learned that connection requires self abandonment, hypervigilance, or performance. So that's not a communication issue, that's relational safety. Most of the women I work with have high intellectual awareness of healthy relationships, but weak embodiment or lived experience of relational safety. And that's generally because there's an intersection of self-esteem. So instead of having healthy self-esteem, we inflate our sense of self-esteem or we collapse. And then it intersects with how we set boundaries. So whether we pardon me, self-abandon in order to maintain connection, or we wall off completely in order to feel safe. So the intersection of how those two variables work together generally show how where the issues are coming up from. So when those happen, we end up with over-functioning instead of relating, people pleasing instead of connecting, and we're managing our relationships instead of feeling safe within them. So that's the gap that we're working to close. So now we zoom out and look at the broader picture of relational well-being overall. So you're going to map this out for yourself. So you're going to pull out your wheel, and in 3 of those slices, you're going to add each one of the variables that we're working with today. And then actually what might be kind of cool here is if in the slices beside it, you could put each of the relational aspects, domains within your life. So intimate partner, family of origin, close friends, or even strangers, so that you can kind of see where you rank depending on each of those structures. It'll give you a really broad view of where you're at and where you might be a little leaky and need to concentrate your energy. And then finally, I want you to identify what feels most expensive right now. So, what you might notice in doing this is that your friends and family zones and stranger zone is great. You're awesome. You're fully covered with all of those, but your intimate partner, you've got lower scores in all of across all 3 domains for that one, and so that would be a good place to focus your energy. So let's do a reflection now. Take a moment and identify the relational area costing your system the most right now. So what we're looking at is like, what's taking your most energy? What's the most expensive? If you look at your daily basis, where is most of your thought process going? And take a moment to write that one down. Generally, when you look at your wheel and kind of zoom out, it's the one with the lowest score. Um, So what I want you to look at is what specifically is it about it that makes this score what it is? And so you can pause and, journal for 5 minutes about this, and then you can pop back on. And then the next thing I want you to do is name one micro shift you could implement in this area to bring more balance. And I mean micro, right? It may be for the first time ever actually naming to yourself that you feel a huge amount of resentment and anger, right? We're not jumping from never, so from constantly maintaining connection and self-abandoning to being like fully self-expressed. It's not going to happen overnight, right? So maybe the first step is simply saying, wow, you know what? Honestly, whew, Like, I'm brewing all the time. I'm stewing about what's going on in my life, and I never seem to kind of like say the thing that needs to be said. So that's an example of a micro shift. And when we focus on those kind of like tiny, tiny little micro shifts and start stringing them together, that's where we start seeing change, as opposed to kind of like that that January 1st, I'm going to go to the gym and work out every single day. It's doesn't last. So write this in the space. So you can write your micro shift in that teeny tiny space, and then you can start tracking as you shift it. So relational well-being isn't about how many people you have in your life. It can be a little bit. The more acquaintances we have, the more connected we feel. But what's most important is whether or not your daily experience of relationships fosters safety, belonging, authenticity, and mutual support. And so from here, we move back into the quantum process, where we focus on awareness, regulation, agency, alignment, and intentional change. So those are small shifts in relational patterns create massive shifts in overall well-being over time. So you can pop off this video and then pop back into the part 3 video where I'll walk you through that quantum process, and then part 4, which is where we set our SMARTS goals, to actually kind of break down how we're going to make that change. Thanks for being here, and I will see you in the next session.